So I was reading both and trying to understand their lives because we all had similar experiences. So both of them write about the first time they were called nigger. And we all heard what the N word. That's every one of us tells the same story. We froze.
Alrighty. Adam, this time I'm gonna introduce you first.
Okay.
Let's see, I had to catch him slipping because everybody loved telling me what I messed up, but I'll take my hat off. Leaving my scarf on. No, I'm sorry. You need to step on your shoe. All right. Ready? All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. So, boom. Welcome back to another episode of the Black Caliber Podcast. Today, I am here with 2 new people. One you may have seen in the last one. You may not, depending on which one you watch. But I'll let him introduce himself.
My name is Adam Green. I'm a sophomore here at Lincoln, and again, very excited for this conversation. This whole topic is, though I haven't gotten very far into it, I'm very excited to. I think I might buy the book actually, based on the last conversation. So I'm very excited.
He started freaking out. You can see he's happy to be.
Great.
And right here, right next to me, we have Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison-Reed, a retired minister, a historian, and a scholar who has dedicated his work to exploring Black history and identity. As the author of a biography on Vincent O. Carter, he has delved deep into Carter's life, his experiences as a Black expatriate, and his lasting impact on literature. We'll discuss Carter's journey, struggles, and triumphs, and why his work still matters today.
Great.
So, first, how you doing today?
All right. Thank you very much. It's an exciting, very exciting day to be here and hear the people we've been meeting with, Chip, I know you've already interviewed, and the other people I've been corresponding with for over 10 years and have never met them. So it's a big deal for me to get to meet these people that I've been corresponding with about Carter's life for over a decade.
Okay.
So my story is a bit weird and different. I actually grew up, my father is a scientist. They took the entire family to Switzerland in 1962. Carter was living in Bern at the same time we were. We lived in the same city for over 14 months. I lived in Switzerland, all total, over 6 years while Carter was there. But the shock for me was one day I was in Chicago going in a bookstore and just going, used bookstore, and I was coming along and there's this book. It said, The Bern Book. And I picked it up and there's a Black man looking at me. I opened it, 1973. This is 1978. So it's 5 years old. I look it up, this Vincent Carter, and I'm stunned because we were there at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know him. I'd never heard of him. Never heard of him, though we lived in Switzerland the exact same time. And so I was a bit shocked, confounded that I didn't know, that nobody in my family knew. Mm-hmm. Nobody knew. And so, of course, I bought the book, rushed home, and started to read it. And Carter is not an easy read, I have to tell you. So I got started, and the first part is interesting. It gets you hooked, and then you're into it for a while. But then he has a way of going interior, quite introspective, and after a while you kind of get lost. And so I had to return to it multiple times before I finished it. But the fact was, I lived in Bern when I was 13 years old, same time Carter was there. So he would have been, at that point, in his 30s. And my family had a long term. My father had actually been there before. My father had been to Bern in 58. He'd been to Bern again in 59. And then he took the whole family in 62. We almost stayed on. So I'm quite familiar with Switzerland. And I have a huge friendship network. And I go back pretty regularly. And I had never heard of Carter. And so he kind of captured my attention. But I was in the last year of I was in the last year of graduate school working on my thesis, and I really didn't have time. I didn't really have time to spend time doing, going deeper into the book, and I put it on my shelf. And then I had one child, and then I had another child, and I had a congregation, and then life went by. And then one day I was home visiting my dad. I lived in Rochester, New York at that point. I was in Chicago visiting my dad, and there was the book. Another copy. I said, Dad, where'd you get that? He said, yeah, Frenny, a friend of ours who is Swiss, had given it to him. And so we talked. He hadn't read it either. Dad hadn't read it either. And so it kind of sat around, and now and then I'd make an effort. And it was really only after I had retired from being a pastor in a congregation, and that I started, took a serious look at it, and started, and only really after I stopped doing any ministry at all, that I, including teaching, that I got serious about looking into it. So that's how that played out. And finally I started tracking. I read it through. I got his other book, came out 2003, Such Sweet Thunder, as opposed to the Baron book. But I was going to Switzerland pretty regularly, and so I did track down his partner, Lisa Latahaz, and I did a radio show with her in around 1910, where I interviewed her. Well, I was interviewed with her, and I read from the Baron book. I read from James Baldwin's book of essay, The Stranger in the Village. Now, do you know about Baldwin and Carter? No? Okay. So that's the other. They were there exactly the same time. James Baldwin was taken to Switzerland by his partner, Lucien Harpsberger, in 1951. So just 2 years before Carter arrived. And by the time Carter arrived, James Baldwin had been in this village called Leukerbad 5 times. And so they were there at the same time. They never knew one another. He must have known of Baldwin, but they never met. In any case, so Baldwin was there, he was there. And so I was getting these bits and pieces. I realized they were both there at the same time and never connected. And so I was reading both and trying to understand their lives, because we all had similar experiences. So both of them write about the first time they were called Neger. In German, Neger, Neger. But you know what it sounds like. And we all heard the N-word. That's all, every one of us heard the N-word.
You stop paying on too.
Oh, sorry.
It picks up on the mic.
Okay,
so
sorry. We all know what it sounds. We all, and we froze. Every one of us tells the same story. We froze. And so I was reading my version of it, Baldwin's version of it, Carter's version of it on this radio show, and that we didn't know what to do. Now, part of us knew it wasn't intimidation. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a put down, because we weren't in America. It was something else, but we didn't know what it was. It's like, shit. And so so I recount that story, because it's shocking when you first do it. What it is it's their universal surprise. Most of them had never seen a black person in the 50s or 60s. No, I mean, it was like, oh my God. They're going, look. And that's what it was. It was surprise. And so it wasn't intimidation, but it was still shocking and still uncomfortable because of what it triggered for all of us. So I started working with her. I actually knew somebody who published I did a very short story of my first 3 years in Switzerland, when I from the ages 13 to 16, in a book called Ticking Along with the Swiss. And so I read from that. I read from Baldwin's Stranger in the Village, which appeared in Atlantic magazine in, October of 1953, which was just after, just after Carter got there. And then I read from Carter's version of that. So that's how long I've been engaged with this. And it is the person who the publisher of Ticking All of the Swiss was interested in doing Carter's book, but couldn't figure out, she just couldn't manage it. It was too complex and too expensive, and she wasn't sure if there was a Swiss market. So I was communicating with her. She talked with Lieselotte Haas, Carter's partner, and then she backed out of it because she just couldn't see how to do it. And then independently, Chip was beginning this other voyage, this other exploration that he was doing with Jesse McCarthy, and then his contact with Lieselotte Haas himself, who he visited. So that's how I got into this. And to continue the story, so I was been communicating with all these people that came to speak at this conference for years, for decades now. I wasn't doing anything. I'd done a little presentation on it, but wasn't really serious about doing anything about him until I retired completely in 2017. And I decided, it was the second time I retired. This time I retired from teaching as opposed to the parish. And so I decided, I knew I'd gone crazy the last time with nothing to do. Well, you'll get there one of these days. I knew if I didn't have anything to do, I was just going to lose my mind. And so I went back to school. I went into a master's program in German language and literature. And so I was doing that very slowly. I didn't want to rush through because I wasn't in a hurry. It's not that I was going to do anything with it. And so so then COVID came. And they stopped meeting in person. We started meeting online. I didn't really like that. So I went to my professor and said, I'm going to do an independent study project. And he said, okay. I said, I'm going to write about this guy named Vincent Carter. So I spent 2 terms working on this, on Vincent Carter, handed in a thesis for my master's degree. He submitted it, and it was awarded the best master's thesis in Canada in German studies for 2022. So I said, oh, I guess I have something here. I mean, these people awarded me for this thesis. I also, in the process, came to write a book review that looked at Carter, but also looked at a contemporary Black writer, 2 Black writers actually, who were a generation younger than Carter, but about their experience about growing up in Switzerland. And so I wrote a book review of that, touching on Carter, and then that appeared in the German Quarterly. And then I decided, okay, I can put these 2 together and make a book out of it. So that's what I did. And so the book is pretty much done, and I'm hunting, and an editor has it at the moment, and I'm waiting to hear from them. So that's where that's at. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
So I do have a question. So it seems like you and Vincent had a lot in common with your where life travels, where you guys have lived. Are there any other experiences that you both went through that kind of drew you more to the book?
Yes. So what happened was, I realized the more I got into it, we were both raised in the church. We were both choir boys. And so and some personality things were similar, that I could see his life and my life in comparison. Like, we went to church every Sunday. I went to choir 3 times a week. I mean, that was the milieu I grew up in, and that was the milieu he grew up in his church in Kansas City. So I identified with that. And I identified with being black in Europe in the 60s and 70s. So those were probably the two primary things, though. And also, he's a deeply spiritual man. And eventually, I would say, finally found his way into more yoga and meditation, and to Muktananda, his guru. And I had been to India as well, to visit Sai Baba, and so I also had the spiritual element that I had also followed into an Indian spirituality thing. So there was enough in common that I felt drawn to him. We're very different people, but we had very similar experiences.
Yeah.
So
well, enough for at least me to see. Hey, they were both in Switzerland.
We were both in Switzerland.
Yeah, no.
Yes. No. It's always interesting that we never ran into him. I think part of it was my dad's world was the university and science.
Yeah.
And his was he was hanging out with a bunch of artists downtown in a cafe, the Café du Commerce, and at nighttime.
Right.
So he's hanging out with them late at night, probably sleeping late into the day, getting up and reading, and that was not. It was kind of the opposite of what I was doing at 13 or what my parents were doing. So I can understand why we never ran. When I thought about it, why we never ran into one another. But I had when my parents left, they left me with a family, and that family actually did know. It came across Carter. They didn't know Carter, but they actually came across him at the Café du Commerce.
Oh, wow.
And they always would say he would be there at a table full of food with people gathered around him, kind of holding forth.
Yeah.
And so they were used to. My friend was a poor student, so they didn't do this very often. But they know that, so they would see him occasionally. So that's how I heard. And this interesting thing also, this friend actually had met James Baldwin coming across on a boat to Sweden, and had an ongoing relationship with Baldwin. So and Baldwin almost came to Bern to visit him, and then called it off at the last moment. So Baldwin and Carter would have been in the same space briefly, but it didn't happen. Carter was actually in Switzerland at least 7 times. Leukerbad, which is in southern Switzerland, up in the mountains. I mean, way up in this mountains, and Baldwin's partner's family came from there, so they went there at least 5 times. He then returned there. They did a movie that's available where they interviewed him, where essentially he reads through or talks his way through the essay "Stranger in the Village," which is what the poet appears in Notes of a Native Son. Then he came back when his play, it's not going to come to mind, premiered in Vienna. Then came to Zurich. So he was in Zurich presenting. And that would have been in 1965. And then later, after Malcolm X was killed, they asked him to write what became the movie about Malcolm X after he was assassinated. And he read the script the first time in Geneva, because he knew no one there. He could just hold up in a hotel and nobody would bother him, as opposed if he'd gone to Paris or somewhere.
Right.
So this is all the stuff I've kind of dug up and found as I've kind of hunted around and compared. I do a lot comparing their lives. Baldwin to Carter, and the differences and the similarities. They were very, very, in some ways, very, very different. In some ways, very, like Carter was an only child.
Okay.
He was an only child, and his parents kind of, doted on him. And Baldwin was the eldest of, was a stepson, and was the eldest of like 8 or something. And he describes trying to read, carrying 2 kids around. I mean, that's what he knew how to do. But he was left responsible for all these other kids they had. So that was very different.
Right.
And also, Baldwin was much more politically minded than Carter. Carter was not politically minded at all in any way, fashion, or form.
Right.
That was just not his world. He was not interested. His world was deeply spiritual. And I think skin color and race was kind of this thing we happened to have,
Right.
but was not, and didn't have anything to do with our essential self. Didn't have anything to do with the spiritual self. And that spiritual self is what he was most interested in. And so, yeah, that's a whole, that was very different. So that's how it came to be. And so this has been building up. I've been working on it. Chip's been working on it. June Graham's been working on it. Jess has been working on it. And I think I've been communicating with all of them at least for 10 years as we've tried to find different. So in that time, Such Sweet Thunder came out. Then came out. Oh boy, I get confused. Then it was re-released. Then they released the Baron book again, which was initially was done in '73 and hadn't been released again. So that came out. Then they redid Such Sweet Thunder, and then both were translated into German. So that's new. The Baron book, Ein weiße Stadt und ich, My White City and Me, and I. And then the Such Sweet Thunder, which has a different name now. Amerigo Jones, I think they gave it the protagonist's name, and that just came out in June in German. So it's been, this acknowledgement of him has been building for years, and has been, in the last 5 years, has really gained momentum. And we'll see what happens next. So, other questions?
Actually, I was just gonna say, so is there anything that you would want to say to anybody who may be interested in his life or the book or anything like that, who may be watching?
Such Sweet Thunder is an easier read. Frankly, the band book's shorter, but the Such Sweet Thunder is an easier read. The other stuff available that he's done is in German, so not available if you're not a German speaker. It takes you back to a different time, and he does a great job at it. It just takes you back to Kansas City in the 20s and 30s. Count Basie would have been there, and other jazz figures would have been there. It was a hopping place back then, and it kind of transports you to a different time. And he's not judgmental. He's not selling anything. He's not pushing an agenda. He's just telling a story, and he's quite talented at telling the story, and not just telling the story, but capturing the language and the feel of the time and the people. Really quite. You kind of have to just kind of let yourself enter into his space and be there with him. But he's quite good at capturing the nuances and the texture and the cadence of the language and the stories. And it's a stream of consciousness. There are no chapters. There's some line breaks. There's no chapters in it. So it's long. So you have to kind of prepare yourself to just kind of enter in this other world that's 100 years ago practically now. Charlie Parker. Actually, it was real Charlie Parker. He went to the same high school as Charlie Parker. He was just 4 years younger than Parker, so they never at that when it's just you just miss. But they were both there at the same time. So it's it's an interesting story. So I would either one of them. You have to be a little more disciplined to read the Barron book, and then just skip over the stuff that's too hard. Just skip over. I was in Switzerland in 23. I usually go as often, not as often as I can, but I hadn't been since COVID. And so I went in 23 and I was in Barron and I discovered that they made a play out of the book in German. And I happened to be there, but I was too late. I couldn't get a ticket. And I also discovered that they were having an art exhibition of African peoples who'd been in Switzerland. So that included Baldwin, that included Carter and other people. And that was getting ready to open up at the art gallery in Aarau, which is one of the cantons. And so I said, okay, I've got to go back. So I went back in October of 23 just to see the play and to go to the art exhibition. And the play it's in German, and so they had translated, but it's fun. It's fun. It's a fun play. It's a fun play. I enjoyed it. It's very interactive. It's a completely mixed cast, male, female, black, white. It's an engaging play, which is now entered in its third year. That's how popular. They had a smaller venue, which was too small. They moved, and then they kept showing it. Now it's about once a month they do it, but it's been going on. They started in, what are we now, 25? The first was in January 23. And so they're into the third year of showing it. So it's popular enough. And young people Switzerland's changed a lot since Carter went there. A lot more people of color. And it's much more of an issue now. And much more awareness is quite different. And so people are more interested, and young people are interested. They're taking school classes to it. So it keeps running. And so that's all for the good. It's all for the good. So that's how that's playing out. And we'll see what happens next. Now that, this conference has happened, I suspect it will generate other opportunities or other things will happen. I'm just not sure what.
Definitely sparking conversation.
So.
All right. And with that, can I just get you to say this is the Black Caliber Podcast?
Hi. This is the Black Caliber Podcast, and we're glad you're here.
Right. And thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah.
And you, Jordan. Yes, and Adam.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Was that okay?
It was great.
It was great.
So